The frontier town of Willow Bend rose dusty and restless under the late summer sun. Wagons creaked past storefronts, horses pawed the dirt, and townsfolk whispered behind gloved hands. Because today was not an ordinary day. Today, a 19-year-old girl was being married off to a man twice her age, rich enough to buy half the county, and feared enough that no one ever crossed him. Evelyn Hart stood at the back of the church, hands trembling as she clutched a bouquet of wild prairie roses. She looked small against the wooden walls, almost swallowed by the silence. She never wanted this. She had dreamed of choosing love someday, a man with gentle hands, a softer life than the one she'd been given. But dreams died quickly when poverty came knocking. Her father had lost the ranch, lost every cow, lost every acre, lost everything except the daughter he now offered like a bargaining chip. And Charles Alden, millionaire cattle baron, owner of 3 sprawling ranches, a man with more enemies than friends, had accepted the deal. Evelyn didn't understand why. Not then. As the church doors opened and Charles stepped inside, the crowd straightened, boots scraping the floor, hats removed in one silent motion. His presence filled the room instantly. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat and dusted boots, he looked like a man carved out of the land itself, harsh, powerful, impossible to ignore. But his eyes, they held something unexpected. Not coldness, not hunger, something unreadable. Evelyn looked away quickly. The pastor called them forward. The vows felt heavy, suffocating. Her voice shook as she spoke them. Charles's did not. He answered every line calmly, firmly, as if he'd always known this moment would come. When he placed the ring on her finger, a beautiful gold band far too fine for her calloused hands, she felt the full weight of her new life tightening around her. The ceremony ended. The crowd stared. And Evelyn became Mrs. Alden, a title she never wanted, tied to a man she barely knew. Outside the church, the heat pressed against her like a warning. Charles helped her into the carriage, his touch surprisingly gentle, though he kept a respectful distance. They rode in silence toward the grand Alden estate, the largest property for miles. Evelyn's future stretched out before her like the open prairie, wide, empty, and frightening. But she didn't yet know the truth, that Charles had agreed to the marriage not out of power, or pride, or debt. He had done it for a reason no one in town could guess. A reason that, one day, would turn her fear into hope, and hope into love. Evelyn had seen large ranch houses before, but nothing like the Alden estate. The mansion stood atop a gentle rise, its white timber walls glowing beneath the sun, its wraparound porch stretching wide like arms that never offered warmth. The place looked less like a home and more like a monument, a declaration of wealth carved into the frontier. When the carriage stopped, Evelyn hesitated before stepping down. Charles offered his hand, not pushing, not pulling, simply waiting. She placed her fingers in his, surprised yet again by the steadiness of his touch. He guided her gently to the ground, then stepped back as if afraid to make her feel trapped. "Mrs. Alden," he said quietly, with a nod. Her stomach twisted at the name. Inside, the house was beautiful. Too beautiful. Chandeliers glimmered above hardwood floors polished to a shine. Paintings of wild stallions and sweeping plains lined the walls. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and leather. But the silence, it swallowed the air. No laughter. No footsteps of children. No humming from a kitchen. Just empty halls echoing with the ghosts of expectations. A house built for a family, yet Charles lived in it alone. The staff stood in a line at the entryway, hats held respectfully. Charles introduced them one by one, his tone steady but distant. Evelyn nodded politely, though her mind raced. Every face seemed to study her with curiosity and something else, pity. This was not a love match. This was survival, and everyone knew it. After the introductions, Charles asked, "Would you like a tour of the house?" His voice was low, almost careful. Evelyn swallowed and nodded. "Yes, thank you." He walked beside her but always kept a few steps back, as though afraid to crowd her. They passed the grand parlor, the formal dining room, the library filled with leather-bound books that smelled of dust and history. But when they reached a small sunroom overlooking the pastures, Evelyn paused. Horses grazed beyond the fence, dozens of them, strong and sleek. The land rolled out for miles, golden under the fading light. She felt both overwhelmed and strangely anchored. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Charles glanced at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Something softened in his expression. "I'm glad you think so." They continued until they reached the upstairs hall. "These are your rooms," he said. "You'll have your privacy. If you need anything, you may ask. You are not restricted here." Restricted. The word tasted bitter, but the reassurance touched her. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded again, then stepped back, almost retreating. "I'll let you settle." And with that, Charles Alden disappeared into the shadows of his massive home, leaving Evelyn alone with her fears, her new name, and the unsettling feeling that beneath all his silence, the man she just married was carrying a burden heavier than hers. That first night, Evelyn barely slept. The sheets were soft, the room warm, the house quiet, too quiet. Every whisper of wind against the windows made her tense. Every creak of the wooden beams reminded her she wasn't home. She was in a stranger's mansion, a stranger who was now her husband. At dawn, she heard the clatter of hooves outside. Curious, she slipped from bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and stepped onto the balcony overlooking the pastures. Charles was already awake. Already saddled. Already riding. He moved across the land like someone who belonged to it entirely. The colt beneath him responded to the lightest pressure, as if the two shared a silent language. Evelyn watched him, surprised by the quiet ease he showed when alone, so different from the reserved man inside the house. He looked freer out there. And strangely lonely. Later that morning, Evelyn descended to the dining room for breakfast. The long wooden table could seat 20. Today, only one place was set, hers. The empty chair at the head of the table made her chest tighten. Charles joined her a moment later, freshly cleaned from the ride, hair still damp. He took the seat at the far end of the table, as though distance were a rule he had written long ago. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "I tried." He nodded, eyes lowering. "This place takes time to adjust to." The silence between them returned, heavy, awkward, yet strangely gentle. Charles never pushed conversation, never demanded she fill the space. It was almost as if he didn't trust himself to take up too much room. Evelyn tried to eat, but her nerves made every bite feel like gravel. At last, she blurted, "You don't have to sit so far away, you know." Charles looked up, startled. He studied her carefully, as though unsure whether she meant it. Then, quietly, hesitantly, he stood and moved a few seats closer. Not beside her, but not at the opposite end either. The distance lessened, only slightly, but enough that Evelyn felt her shoulders soften. After breakfast, she wandered toward the stables. The scent of hay, leather, and horses was familiar, comforting. Stable hands paused to tip their hats, whispering in low voices after she passed. Inside, a chestnut mare whickered softly. Evelyn approached her instinctively, placing gentle hands on the horse's muzzle. "I see you like animals," a voice said behind her. She turned. Charles. His expression was unreadable, but something about seeing her with the mare softened him. "Horses were the only friends I had growing up," Evelyn admitted before catching herself. Charles nodded slowly. "They don't judge, they just understand." His voice held a crack she hadn't heard before. "You can ride any time you'd like," he added. "The land is yours as much as mine." It was the kindest thing he'd said yet, and it stirred something inside her, something small, unsure, but real. Word traveled fast in Willow Bend, faster than dust on a dry wind. By the end of the week, everyone in town had something to say about the new Mrs. Alden. Evelyn heard the whispers whenever she rode into town for supplies. Some didn't even bother to lower their voices. "She's too young. She'll never last out there. Bet she cried through the whole wedding. Poor thing. Married for money, not love. She won't soften him. No one could." Evelyn kept her head high, but every whisper cut deep. Charles rarely came to town with her. He sent 2 ranch hands instead, Wyatt and Boone, loyal men who watched over her without hovering. They treated her with respect, but their presence only fueled rumors. "Look at that," one woman muttered as Evelyn passed. "Guard dogs, just to keep her from running." Evelyn kept walking, refusing to show how much the words hurt. But when she mounted her horse for the ride back to the mansion, her hands trembled. Charles was on the porch when she arrived, reviewing papers with his foreman. He looked up immediately, sharp, alert, assessing her face before anything else. She dismounted slowly, smoothing her skirt. "How was town?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated, loud. He understood. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened. The foreman took one look at him and quietly excused himself. Charles stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough she felt his presence like a shield. "What did they say?" he asked quietly. "It doesn't matter." "It does." Evelyn finally met his eyes. "They think I'm here against my will. That I was forced." Charles froze, breath stilling in his chest. "Were you?" The question hit her like a stone. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I didn't want the marriage," she said honestly. "But I wanted my family safe. I made the choice." Charles looked away, jaw working. "I never wanted you to feel trapped." His voice was low, heavy with something she couldn't name. "I don't feel trapped," she admitted, surprised at her own answer. "Just judged." Charles nodded once, slowly. "The town talks because they know nothing of my reasons." "Then why did you marry me?" she asked before she could stop herself. He didn't answer, not yet. His eyes dropped to the ground, expression tightening as though the truth was too heavy to lift. "Someday," he said softly, "you'll know." Evelyn swallowed. The evasiveness should have frustrated her. Instead, it made her curious. Curious, and oddly safe. That evening, long after dinner, Evelyn stood in the hallway, watching the flickering lamplight cast shadows across the floorboards. Charles passed by quietly, pausing when he saw her. "If you ever want to ride with me in the mornings," he said, "you're welcome." It wasn't an order. Wasn't even a request. It was an invitation. A small thing, yet the first crack in the wall between them. And for the first time since the wedding, Evelyn felt something she hadn't expected to feel here. A beginning. The next morning, Evelyn woke before sunrise. The sky outside her window was still dark, painted in shades of indigo and fading night. She hesitated only a moment before dressing quickly and heading toward the stables. Something inside her, curiosity, restlessness, hope, pulled her outside. Charles was already there. He stood beside his black stallion, tightening the cinch with practiced movements. His expression was calm, but when he saw her approach, something flickered across his face, surprise, then something gentler. "You're up early," he said. "You invited me," she replied, a little breathless. He nodded toward a saddled mare waiting beside him. "I thought you might come." Evelyn blinked. He had prepared a horse, just for her. They rode out as the horizon began to brighten, the world still quiet and half asleep. Hooves thudded softly against the earth. A cool breeze brushed past them, carrying the scent of morning grass and distant rain. Charles rode a little ahead at first, giving her space, but she urged her mare closer until they rode side by side. The land stretched endlessly, rolling hills, grazing cattle, a river glimmering like silver as dawn broke. For the first time, Evelyn saw the kingdom he ruled, the one she had been married into. It was breathtaking. "Is this why you wake up so early?" she asked. "It's the only time the land feels honest," he replied. "Before people touch it, before problems find me." "Do they find you often?" she asked softly. Charles gave a faint, humorless smile. "More than I'd like." His voice carried a weight she didn't yet understand. They slowed near a ridge overlooking the entire valley. The sun finally crested the horizon, bathing everything in gold. Evelyn couldn't help the small gasp that escaped her lips. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Charles didn't look at the land. He looked at her. "It is," he agreed quietly. They stayed on the ridge much longer than either of them intended. Evelyn asked questions about the ranch, the cattle, the hands, the land, and Charles answered every one, his voice steady, surprisingly open. She learned he ran 3 ranches, employed nearly 100 men, and still carried the burdens alone. But he also listened. When she told him about her childhood, her mother, the ranch they'd lost, the dreams that had been ripped from her hands, Charles said nothing for a long while. Then, "I'm sorry." Not out of obligation, but because he meant it. Something in her chest loosened. On the ride back, their silence wasn't heavy this time. It was warm, comfortable. When they reached the stables, Charles dismounted and offered his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. His grip was steady, warm, grounding. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For letting me see this world." His gaze softened, the morning light catching the faintest smile at the corner of his lips. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "it's your world now too." And for the first time since their wedding, she believed it. The days after their ride settled into a rhythm, quiet, steady, and strangely comforting. Evelyn found herself exploring more of the ranch, learning the routines, the staff, the land. And without meaning to, she began to understand Charles Alden in pieces. He rose before dawn. He worked until dusk. He avoided town unless absolutely necessary. And every night, as if following an unbreakable ritual, he disappeared into his private study and stayed there for hours. Evelyn was never invited inside. She never heard voices, only silence. But some nights, she heard something else. Footsteps pacing. A chair scraping. The muffled thump of a fist hitting a desk. Those sounds carried weight, deep, lonely weight. And Evelyn's curiosity began to grow. One afternoon, while Charles and his men rode out to inspect cattle, Evelyn wandered into the west wing of the house, a part she rarely visited. She paused at the end of the hall, where sunlight spilled through a tall window. A small wooden box sat on a hallway table, carved with intricate floral patterns. It didn't belong to the rest of the house. It felt personal. She lifted the lid slightly. Inside, she glimpsed objects wrapped in cloth. Photographs, letters, something hidden and delicate. Before she could look closer, she heard boots approaching. "Charles." Evelyn closed the lid gently and stepped back just as he turned the corner. His eyes dropped to the box, then snapped to her face. His breath hitched. For the first time since their marriage, emotion, raw, sharp, flashed in his eyes. "Did you open it?" he asked quietly. "Just a little," she admitted. "I didn't mean to intrude." Charles exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "It's not you I'm upset with." His voice cracked, barely audible. "What's inside?" she asked gently. "A reminder," he murmured, "of something I lost." Evelyn waited, offering silence, not pressure, not questions. Charles rested a hand on the table beside the box, fingers trembling just slightly. "I'll tell you someday, but not today." There was pain in his voice. Deep pain. The kind that takes years to name. That evening, when he returned to his study, Evelyn passed by and saw the door slightly ajar for the first time. Inside, Charles sat with the box open beside him, a photograph in his hands. His shoulders were hunched, his jaw clenched, his breath unsteady. He wasn't the feared millionaire cowboy the town whispered about. He wasn't the distant husband she'd married. He was a man carrying a wound he had never allowed to heal. As she watched him, unnoticed, something inside her shifted. She no longer feared him. She no longer felt like a stranger in his home. She felt something far more dangerous. She wanted to understand him. Later that night, as she lay awake in the dark, Evelyn realized something. Charles Alden didn't marry her for power. He didn't marry her for debt. He didn't marry her for appearances. He married her because of something buried deep in that box, something he couldn't let go of on his own. Night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. The cattle were calm, the wind low, but Cole's heartbeat was anything but steady. He stood alone in the barn loft, holding the small wooden box he'd carved in secret for weeks. Every line, every curve, shaped with hands that had known only hard labor, never tenderness until her. Inside the box lay the gift, a simple silver pendant he'd traded half a season's wages for. Not flashy, not grand, but chosen with the quiet devotion of a man who'd fallen in love against his own will. Below, he heard Alara's soft footsteps. She was searching for him, and part of him wanted to run, to hide this foolish offering. But she climbed the ladder, lantern glow brushing her face like gold. She stopped when she saw the box. "Cole, what's that?" He swallowed hard. "Nothing, just something I ain't brave enough to give you yet." Her breath caught. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't the only one afraid of what was growing between them. A week after the storm, the Alden estate was alive with quiet anticipation. Charles had summoned carpenters, stable hands, and a few trusted ranch managers to the main yard. Evelyn followed at a distance, her curiosity piqued by the flurry of activity. She had no idea what he was planning, but the energy in the air hinted at something monumental. Charles rode up beside her, boots sinking slightly in the soft soil. His expression remained calm, unreadable, yet there was tension beneath the surface, a weight he carried even in the simplest moments. "A gift," he said simply. "For you." Evelyn blinked, unsure whether to be startled or amused. "For me?" He nodded, a token of respect and acknowledgement. "You are not merely the girl I married out of necessity. You are capable, brave, and deserving. I hope this horse reminds you of that." Her gaze followed him toward a newly built stable. Inside stood a magnificent chestnut mare, sleek and strong, nuzzling the hand of the man who had once seemed untouchable. Evelyn's breath caught. She had loved horses all her life, but never had she been gifted one so perfect, so alive. Her fingers trembled as she ran them along the mare's mane. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Charles watched her closely. "It is yours. Take care of her, ride her. She will challenge you, but she will also teach you." Evelyn's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and astonishment. In this moment, the boundaries of their relationship shifted imperceptibly. This was not an obligation, not a show of power. This was trust. The chestnut mare moved closer, nudging her gently, sensing the warmth in her touch. Evelyn laughed softly, a sound that had been absent since the wedding. She looked at Charles, searching his eyes, finding something she had not dared to hope for. Pride, admiration, a flicker of something warmer. For the first time, she felt a connection unbound by fear or duty. She felt seen, recognized, respected. The townspeople would gossip. They always did. But here, on this land that stretched beyond the horizon, Evelyn's worth was measured not in whispers, but in the quiet acknowledgement of a man who could have ignored her entirely, and yet chose to honor her. As the sun set, painting the pastures in gold and amber, Evelyn led the mare across the fields, feeling strength in every step, courage in every beat of her heart. Charles watched from the veranda, a distant silhouette softened by fading light. He did not speak. He did not need to. In the simple act of giving, he had said everything that words could not. That night, as she groomed the horse under the glow of lanterns, Evelyn realized the depth of her new life. It was not built solely on survival. It was built on recognition, trust, and a quiet beginning that hinted at love. Somewhere in the mansion, Charles paused, listening to the soft rhythm of her voice as she sang to the mare, a tender melody that filled the cool night air. The acknowledgement of her bravery, her determination, and her spirit had touched something inside him, something he could no longer deny. The gift had changed everything. The days after the gift of the chestnut mare carried a new rhythm. Evelyn awoke each morning eager to ride, to explore the sprawling pastures, to feel the wind whip her hair as the horse galloped across the open fields. Each ride gave her confidence, and each quiet glance from Charles softened the rigid armor he wore around his heart. Yet inside the mansion, the air remained measured. Meals were formal, the corridors echoed emptily, and conversation was a careful balance of necessity. Evelyn noticed subtle shifts in Charles, small gestures that hinted at a thaw. A nod of approval, a brief, fleeting glance of concern, a patience she hadn't expected. One evening, after a long ride, Evelyn returned to the library. Charles was seated at a massive oak desk, papers spread before him, candlelight flickering across his sharp features. He looked up as she entered, his eyes catching hers with unusual focus. "Good evening," he said, his tone steady but softer than usual. "Good evening," she replied, placing her gloves on a side table. She paused, sensing an unusual stillness in the room, a rare invitation for closeness. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit," he said. Evelyn obeyed, noting how deliberate his words were. "There is something I must say," he began, his eyes holding hers now. "You have earned more than respect through your perseverance, your courage, and the grace with which you have faced this life. You are no longer merely my wife by obligation." Evelyn's heart quickened. The acknowledgement struck deeper than she expected. She had endured ridicule, doubt, and the heavy weight of being thrust into a life she had not chosen, yet now a man she barely understood recognized her strength. "You are someone whose presence I value," Charles continued, voice low but unwavering. "I wish to make that clear." She struggled to respond, words failing to capture the torrent of gratitude and surprise that surged within her. She simply nodded, letting silence speak where speech failed. His expression softened, and for the first time, Evelyn glimpsed the man behind the stern facade. The same man the town had feared, the man she had married with apprehension, now appeared human, vulnerable, capable of acknowledgement and admiration. The moment stretched on, undisturbed by servants or the responsibilities of the ranch. Evelyn felt a subtle bridge forming, a foundation of trust, respect, and perhaps the faint beginnings of affection. As she left the library and stepped onto the veranda, the sky was ablaze with the colors of sunset, gold, amber, and rose stretching across the horizon. She mounted her chestnut mare, feeling the rhythm of its gait beneath her. Every step carried a lightness she hadn't felt before. She had survived hardship, endured judgment, and navigated the suffocating expectations of a forced marriage. And now, she was breaking through the walls of a man's guarded heart, a man who, for the first time, seemed willing to meet her halfway. From a distance, Charles watched, silent and contemplative. The first fragile strands of connection had been laid, and with them, the possibility of a marriage born not of obligation but of mutual recognition and growing respect. The wind stirred the pastures, carrying whispers of change, hope, and perhaps love. The morning of the celebration dawned clear and crisp, sunlight spilling over the rolling pastures of the Alden estate. Word had spread quietly through Willow Bend that the estate would host a modest gathering to honor Evelyn's transition into married life. Though small, the event drew the curiosity of nearly the entire town, whispers trailing behind them as they arrived to witness the young bride in her new world. Evelyn stood in her simple gown, pale blue ribbon tied neatly in her hair, a symbol of both her resilience and the life she had fought to navigate. She adjusted it carefully, feeling a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Today, she would be seen, truly seen, not as a pawn of circumstance but as a woman of courage and dignity. Charles appeared beside her, tall, composed, and yet softened by an almost imperceptible smile. He gestured toward the chestnut mare waiting patiently in the yard. Evelyn's eyes widened, a gasp escaping her lips. He had returned the gift he had given her privately, ensuring she had a companion, a friend, and a symbol of her newfound strength. "It is for you," he said simply. "Ride her. Let her remind you of the strength you already carry." The townsfolk fell silent as Evelyn mounted the horse. Her posture was upright, regal, yet unpretentious. The ribbon in her hair fluttered in the breeze, the mare's polished coat gleaming under the morning sun. Every eye that had once whispered judgment now watched in awe. Charles approached, carrying a small, intricately carved wooden box. Evelyn opened it carefully, revealing a delicate silver pendant with a blue gemstone, the same color as her ribbon, symbolizing courage, hope, and resilience. "You have endured more than most," Charles said quietly. "This is for you, for all that you were and all you have endured. And for the life we might share together." A hush fell over the crowd. The murmurs ceased. Those who had doubted her, whispered about her youth and inexperience, now watched as the young bride received recognition and honor from the man everyone feared. The gift, the horse, the pendant, was more than material. It was acknowledgement, respect, and the first step toward trust and understanding. Evelyn looked at Charles, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, she felt truly seen. His approval, his gesture, his quiet words had broken through the barriers of duty and fear, transforming them into something tender and real. The townspeople understood immediately. This was not a marriage of convenience. It was the beginning of a partnership forged in endurance, courage, and mutual recognition. Evelyn's stance, the gentle pride in her eyes, the calm strength she radiated, it silenced the whispers forever. Charles watched her, the hard lines of authority softened by warmth. The gift had done more than stun the town. It had bridged a gap between two lives, creating the first fragile, yet undeniable, bond of love and respect. As the sun climbed higher, painting the estate in golden light, Evelyn guided her mare across the fields, each stride steady, confident, and free. The marriage that had begun in fear and obligation had grown into something neither had expected, a connection that could flourish beyond duty, beyond judgment, and beyond circumstance. The town watched in awe, and in that quiet moment, the gift, unexpected, meaningful, and heartfelt, spoke louder than any words ever could. Evelyn's journey from a forced bride to a beloved wife was complete.